I was sitting at my desk finishing up emails when my phone buzzed. I glanced at it, expecting something ordinary, maybe a grocery list or a silly meme from my sister. But what I saw, it knocked the air right out of me. Pack your things and leave. You're no longer useful. My mistress is moving in. That was it. No punctuation, no warmth, just a cold command. I read it again. Then again. My fingers went numb. I don't know how long I just sat there, staring at the screen like it had betrayed me too. What kind of man does that? What kind of husband? We just celebrated our anniversary 3 weeks ago. Dinner at our favorite place, champagne, laughter that felt real. I even wore the earrings he gave me years ago, the ones I thought still meant something. I looked at that message and realized I didn't know the man I'd built my life around. The one I had defended to friends when he worked late, who I stood beside during setbacks, who I believed in, completely. I'd given up so much for him, opportunities, time, pieces of myself. And yet, in that moment, I wasn't angry. Not yet. I wasn't crying either. There was something colder rising in me, steadier, like a switch had flipped. I didn't reply. What was there to say to someone who didn't even have the decency to speak those words out loud? I sat there in silence, hearing nothing but the hum of the office around me. It was like I was floating above my own life, watching it crack in half. But even in the shock, I knew this wasn't the end, not for me. When I finally stood up, I wasn't the same woman who had walked into that office that morning. Something in me had shifted. I looked at the screen one last time, not with tears, but with clarity. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was a door. And I wasn't going to crawl through it. I was going to walk through it, head high. He thought he'd broken me. What he did was wake me up. I drove home in a fog, my hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary, but steady. The radio played something upbeat, like it had no idea my life had just exploded. I turned it off. Silence felt more honest. The neighborhood looked the same, the trees swaying in the breeze, kids riding bikes. But everything had shifted. The house we shared came into view, that stupid blue door he insisted on painting, and I hated. And for the first time, I didn't see a home. I saw a crime scene. Not of violence, but of abandonment. Walking through that door, I noticed everything. The jacket he always left tossed on the back of the chair, his shoes kicked off carelessly in the hallway. There was still coffee in the pot. It was like the world hadn't caught up yet, like it hadn't heard what he said to me. I walked past it all, past the photographs on the wall of vacations, anniversaries, that one Halloween we laughed so hard we cried. They meant nothing now. I felt like a guest in my own life, a stranger in a museum of a marriage that never really existed. I sat on the edge of the bed, looking around the room we used to share, and the stillness settled in like dust. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I just breathed, deep and slow, like I was anchoring myself to the floor. I thought about all the sacrifices I'd made, the job I turned down in Seattle, the friends I'd lost touch with while playing the perfect wife, the dreams I shelved because his came first. I thought about every single time I chose him over myself, and I felt something spark inside me. Not bitterness, not vengeance, something more dangerous. Clarity. That message wasn't just a goodbye. It was an erasure, a dismissal. He reduced me to no longer useful, like I was some piece of furniture he was done with. But I wasn't disposable. I wasn't replaceable. I had value. And he was about to learn just how much. I didn't know the exact plan yet. But I knew one thing for certain. He had underestimated the wrong woman. I stayed in that room longer than I needed to. Not because I was frozen, but because I was absorbing, calculating. Every detail suddenly had weight. The drawer where he kept receipts, the safe he thought I didn't know the code to, the file cabinet in the study, half buried under junk. I wasn't just looking at a house anymore. I was looking at the battlefield, and I wasn't leaving without knowing exactly where every weapon was. He wanted me gone, but he forgot one thing. I'd built this life, brick by brick, beside him. I knew where the cracks were. There was a time I would have begged for an explanation, pleaded for the truth. Not anymore. Now all I wanted was to understand the layout of the game he thought he was playing, and beat him at it. Quietly, methodically. I'd spent years putting him first, trusting blindly. That part of me was dead now, and in its place, a woman who no longer asked for permission to exist. A woman who could see through illusions and move in silence. I wasn't interested in revenge for the sake of pain. I was after something cleaner, smarter, something permanent. I walked to the closet and pulled out a suitcase, the same one I'd used on our honeymoon. I almost laughed at the irony. I packed slowly. Not because I didn't know what to take, but because I was already thinking ahead. My mind was moving fast. Legal documents, financial trails, digital fingerprints. I'd learned more during this marriage than he ever realized. While he was busy chasing control, I had been building knowledge. And knowledge? That's a dangerous thing in the hands of a woman who's been betrayed. By the time I zipped up the bag, I wasn't the same woman who read that message earlier. I looked around one last time, not to mourn, but to memorize. Every corner of that house held a piece of me, and now I was taking them back, piece by piece. He thought I'd crumble. What he didn't know was this. I don't fall. I rise. And what comes next? Well, let's just say, I was done playing fair. I didn't text him back, didn't scream, didn't call anyone to cry about what he'd done. That's what he expected. Chaos. He thought he'd thrown a grenade into my life and that I'd spiral, but instead, I got calm. Cold, even. I waited until I knew he wouldn't be home, that window between his gym hour and happy hour with her. And I went back. Not to confront, to collect. I wasn't just packing clothes, I was packing power, and I was going to take everything he never imagined I'd touch. The moment I stepped inside, my heart pounded, but not from sadness, from focus. I moved through the house with purpose. I opened drawers he thought I'd never look in. I went straight to the safe, punched in the birth date of his mother, because of course it was that. And it clicked open like it was waiting for me. Inside, passports, bank documents, that shady USB drive he once told me was just tax files. I didn't touch anything yet. I took photos. Every single page, account number, transaction. My phone became my shield. Then I moved to the study. The smell of his cologne lingered on the chair. Disgusting now, like poison in the air. I opened folders, snapped more photos, sent copies to a hidden drive I'd set up minutes earlier. Marriage certificates, property deeds, shared investments, old emails he printed and never deleted. Everything he'd foolishly assumed I was too naive to understand. But I wasn't the woman he married anymore. I wasn't standing still while my life burned. I was becoming the fire. I found the burner phone he used to text her. Yes, I knew. He hid it in a hollowed-out book on the shelf, which would have been clever if I didn't clean that shelf every damn week. I took screenshots, dates, payments, explicit texts. I didn't flinch. I just filed it all. Quietly. Thoroughly. The version of me who once believed in protecting him was long gone. Now I was protecting myself, and building a map he'd never see coming. I made sure not to leave a trace. Every drawer I opened went back the way I found it. Every picture frame I lifted to check behind, I set back exactly right. This wasn't a tantrum. It was a strategy. And the best part? He'd come home and think nothing had changed. He wouldn't notice the files were rearranged or that the safe's contents were slightly off-center. He wouldn't question the missing copies of certain insurance forms or the tiny gap on the shelf where that hollow book used to sit. He'd walk in blind, exactly how I wanted him. I wasn't just gathering documents. I was changing locks he didn't even know existed. Digital ones. Online accounts, subscriptions, shared apps. One by one, I reset the passwords. Not to steal. Not yet. Just to control. He could have his little fantasy life with her, thinking I was out of the picture. Meanwhile, I was rearranging the entire chessboard. I even checked the camera system, the one he installed to protect us, but mostly used to monitor me. I wiped the footage, and then I left a new admin password, one only I knew. I took my time with the valuables. Not the flashy ones. Those didn't matter to me. I wanted the ones with leverage. The antique watch his father gave him. The signed documents from the business deal he never reported. A silver pen he used to sign our prenup, ironically. They weren't just items, they were reminders. Anchors to the life we built and the control he thought he had. I didn't take them out of revenge. I took them to remind myself I was part of this empire. I helped build it, and I'd be damned if I left empty-handed. Before I walked out, I stood in the kitchen, the place I'd spent years cooking his favorite meals, organizing dinner parties, pretending we were happy. I stared at the counter and remembered the night he told me he couldn't have done it all without me. Ironic, really. Because now, I was making sure he couldn't keep any of it without me either. I took one last breath, not of grief, but of satisfaction. I wasn't fleeing, I was flipping the script, and he wouldn't know it until it was far too late. As I closed the door behind me, I didn't look back. Not once. I slid the key into my coat pocket, the one he didn't know had a double lining, and walked to my car like I was just running errands. Nothing about me screamed heartbreak. I didn't crumble, I didn't fall apart. I left the house like a woman leaving a meeting that went exactly as planned, and in a way, it had. I had everything I needed, and more importantly, he had no idea I'd ever been there with that purpose. Driving away, I felt this strange mix of sorrow and adrenaline, like shedding a skin that had grown tight over the years. There were moments, flickers, when I'd remember a softer version of myself, one who might have begged him to reconsider, asked what went wrong, clung to the hope of fixing it. But that version of me, she was gone, left in that house somewhere between the empty jewelry box and the shredded trust. I wasn't carrying her forward. I was only taking what mattered, and none of it had his name on it. That night, I didn't sleep. Not out of worry, but out of clarity. My mind was sharp, wide awake, already mapping next steps. I backed everything up, to cloud storage, 2 external drives, an encrypted folder. I even printed out a hard copy set and hid it somewhere he'd never find. I wasn't taking chances. The next part of this wouldn't be rushed. It needed precision, quiet moves, legal ones, financial ones, the kind that don't make noise until the collapse is already halfway done. He had declared the end. What he didn't realize was, I was just beginning. And as I lay there in that unfamiliar hotel bed, the weight of the day pressing into the mattress beneath me, I let myself smile. Not out of joy, but out of knowing. He thought I walked out defeated. But what I took with me, that was something he could never steal back. Control, information, leverage. And the beautiful part? He wouldn't even notice the missing pieces until the whole thing came crashing down. The next morning, I put on makeup like armor. Nothing dramatic, just enough to look composed, credible, powerful. I walked into that law office not as a scorned wife, but as a strategist. The attorney listened quietly as I laid out the timeline, the assets, the affair. I didn't even need to dramatize it. The evidence spoke loud enough. The passwords, the account balances, the photos, the mistress's name on financial transactions tied to his business. My lawyer blinked, nodded slowly, then leaned back and said, "He just handed you the win." I left that meeting with more than legal backing. I left with a blueprint. Everything I needed to start building the fall. But I wasn't reckless. I wasn't trying to ruin him emotionally. That would have been too easy. I wanted to dismantle him where it hurt, his reputation, his empire, his illusion of control. So I contacted a financial advisor. Turns out many of our assets weren't just jointly owned, some were in my name entirely. Gifts he registered sloppily. Accounts I opened that he forgot about. I froze the joint ones first, no warning. Just silence. He didn't notice right away. I checked. The man who once micromanaged our grocery budget now spent all his time posting soft focus pictures of brunch with her. He was distracted, confident, unbothered, perfect. That's how I slipped under his radar. While he played pretend with his new toy, I moved in shadows. I filed paperwork, adjusted legal titles, sent notifications. All quiet, all clean. I knew how to play his game because I'd played beside him for years. I just never thought I'd have to turn that knowledge into a weapon. But then came the fun part. The piece I knew he never saw coming. I crafted an anonymous email, simple, direct, laced with proof. I sent it to 3 of his business partners, the ones who cared about ethics clauses and contract legitimacy. Attached? Evidence that the woman he moved into our home was also pocketing money through backdoor deals. Deals he either knew about or was too stupid to notice. I hit send, and for the first time in weeks, I let myself breathe. Not because it was done, but because the cracks had finally begun to show. The fallout didn't take long. 2 days after I sent those emails, one of his partners resigned from a joint venture. Another suspended an upcoming deal, citing concerns over compliance. And just like that, his empire, the one he built with charm and shortcuts, started to wobble. I watched from a distance, not gloating, not celebrating, just observing. He still hadn't connected the dots, still thought he was in control. That was the beauty of it. He thought I was gone. But I was everywhere. In the paperwork. In the silence. In the slow unraveling of everything he held sacred. I kept feeding the fire, carefully. A redacted contract here. A flagged transaction there. Just enough to make his colleagues doubt. Just enough to make the banks ask questions. The mistress was sloppy, charging vacations to a corporate card, submitting invoices for work she never did. She thought sleeping with the boss made her untouchable. She didn't know that the real threat wasn't the other executives. It was the woman she helped replace. And I wasn't just coming for her lifestyle. I was coming for the illusion she believed she stole. Every night I went back to that hotel, ordered takeout, and reviewed documents like I was prepping for trial. There was something oddly comforting about it. The structure, the precision, the quiet satisfaction of knowing every detail. I wasn't hiding anymore. I was positioning, moving, taking space where I had once been asked to shrink. I never imagined I'd find strength in legal codes or account statements, but here I was, not just surviving, but strategizing. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming my voice in a language they thought I didn't speak. One night, I watched him live streaming a company event, all smiles, sipping champagne, arm around her waist. I zoomed in, not on his face, but on the people behind him, the forced smiles, the sideways glances, the way one executive whispered something into another's ear. That was all I needed to see. The seeds were sprouting, the narrative was shifting, and he still had no clue the story was no longer his to write. I didn't rush the divorce filing. That would have made him suspicious. Instead, I waited, just long enough for the pressure to build around him. I let the business deals stall, the partners distance themselves, the whispering begin. I knew him well enough to predict what he'd do next. He'd start blaming others, the assistant, the economy. Eventually, maybe even her, but never himself. That arrogance? It was my greatest asset. While he was busy playing defense in the boardroom, I filed the paperwork quietly. Everything tied up, no room for loopholes. I had receipts for days, and a legal team who believed in making them count. There was something satisfying about weaponizing the very structure he once used to control me. The accounts he insisted I manage, just for convenience. The paperwork he made me sign but never read. The trust he opened in my name for tax reasons. All of it, mine now, legally, strategically. I wasn't doing anything sneaky. I was just turning on the lights and letting the truth be seen. The truth he had buried under charm and spreadsheets and a woman he thought would never question him. I knew the mistress would catch wind eventually. And she did, through a friend of a friend who worked at one of the firms. Word was spreading, not about the affair, that was old news, but about the collapse, the shifting ground, the questions, the silence from his most important investors. And her reaction? She started posting cryptic little quotes about loyalty and real queens on social media. That's when I knew she felt the ground shaking too. I didn't need to confront her. Life was already doing that for me. By the time the first contract was officially canceled and the media started poking around the edges of the story, I was already 3 steps ahead. I'd opened a new account, hired a branding consultant, sketched out the first draft of a business plan. I wasn't just taking things away from him. I was building something for me. Something real. Something lasting. And the best part? He had no idea who he was really at war with. Not a bitter ex-wife, but a woman who had learned how to weaponize her silence. The day I walked back into that house, it wasn't with a suitcase. It was with a court order, a lawyer, 2 officers, and a locksmith. I stood on the porch like a ghost from a past life, except this time, I wasn't there to haunt. I was there to reclaim. The house still looked the same flower pots, same chipped paint on the railing, but I wasn't the same woman who once stood inside it, trying to keep a marriage from cracking. This time, I wasn't holding anything together. I was taking it apart. She opened the door, the mistress, robe-clad, hair up, confused, like I was some delivery she hadn't ordered. For a second, she didn't speak, just stared at me, then glanced over my shoulder at the officers. That's when her face shifted. Reality has a way of rearranging a person's features, and watching it happen in real time was poetic. I didn't say a word. I let the lawyer do the talking. He handed over the documents, stated the terms. The house was part of the marital estate. And as of that morning, under court supervision, it was being repossessed. Then he showed up. Late, as always, with that same smugness that used to unravel me. Not this time. He walked up like he had any control over what was about to happen, ready to bark orders, to posture. But when the officer stepped forward and told him to stand back, I saw something shift behind his eyes, confusion, followed by disbelief, and then the most satisfying flicker of panic. That's when I leaned in, just enough for only him to hear, and said, "You should have checked whose name was on the deed. It was never yours alone." I didn't raise my voice, didn't gloat. I just stepped aside and let the locksmith through. He stood there, trying to argue with legal facts, which is always a losing battle. She hovered behind him, trying to cover herself with that robe, like modesty mattered now. And I just watched, calm, steady, not out of coldness, but because I'd already bled all the emotions I needed to. This wasn't about closure. This was about conclusion, and I wasn't leaving without it. I walked through the house slowly, deliberately, like someone touring a memory they'd already let go of. The living room looked staged, throw pillows arranged just so, a wine glass on the coffee table, the scent of some overpriced candle in the air. She'd tried to make it hers. I could see that. But it still echoed with everything I'd built, every corner touched by my choices, every wall painted with plans he and I had once made together. It was never hers to own. And soon, it wouldn't be his to lose. It would simply be mine to reclaim. The officer stood at the front door while the lawyer made his calls. I stayed quiet. I didn't need a performance. The silence did more than words ever could. He stood in the corner, arms crossed like he was still trying to find an angle, still trying to figure out how it had all slipped through his fingers. I let him wonder. Let him sit in the slow realization that everything he'd thrown away had never truly belonged to him. Not the house, not the finances, and certainly not the control he thought he held over me. She tried to speak, something about how this wasn't fair, and I almost laughed. Fair. The word echoed in my head like a bad joke. What was fair about the message he sent? About moving her into my home while I was still bleeding from the betrayal? What was fair about being discarded like I had no name on the title, no skin in the game, no history in these walls? No. Fair had left the building the moment he hit send on that message. What was happening now wasn't revenge. It was realignment. I didn't come to destroy him. That's what made this so much more powerful. I came to reclaim what was legally mine, emotionally earned, and morally deserved. The police didn't need to raise their voice. The lawyer didn't need to repeat himself. The papers were signed, the orders were clear, and I didn't need to scream to be heard. I just needed to be present, in control, and untouchable. I gathered a few of my things from the upstairs closet. The coat I'd left behind, a small jewelry box tucked behind old scarves, a photo album I couldn't bear to see tossed aside. Not because I still clung to what we had, but because I refused to let her wear my memories like hand-me-downs. Every item I touched, I did so with intention. There was no rush, no chaos, just quiet control. He stood at the bottom of the stairs, watching like a man who finally realized the chessboard was flipped, and he wasn't the one holding the queen. When I came back down, I didn't even look at him. I thanked the officers. I shook my lawyer's hand. I nodded to the locksmith, who was already replacing the deadbolt. And when I reached the door, I paused, not to make a scene, but to give myself one last moment of stillness. I turned back, looked at the place we used to call home, and for the first time, I felt nothing. No ache, no regret. Just the kind of peace that comes from knowing you held the line. And then walked past it. He called my name as I opened the door. Just once. It hung in the air like a question he didn't deserve an answer to. I didn't turn around. He'd lost the right to that part of me. The part that responded to him, that once waited for his voice like it meant something. That woman had left a long time ago. And this version? She didn't need closure. She was her own ending. I stepped outside, the sun warm on my skin, and let the door close behind me with the softest click. It wasn't a slam. It wasn't theatrical. It was just final. And as I walked to the car, I felt something I hadn't in weeks. A smile. Small, but real. Because while he stood in the ruins of everything he thought he controlled, I was already walking toward something new. Something mine. The divorce was finalized on a Thursday. It was raining, not dramatically, just a steady, quiet kind of rain. The kind that felt cleansing. I sat in the courthouse parking lot with the signed documents on the passenger seat, staring at them like they were more than just legal papers. They were proof that I had walked through the fire, gathered every broken piece of myself, and forged something stronger in its place. I didn't cry. I didn't even exhale hard. I just nodded to myself, like a promise kept. He was officially my past. But I was just getting started. He lost everything he thought he could protect. The house was gone, the accounts locked, the equity from the business, mine in part, now fully leveraged. The scandal that followed, I didn't even have to feed it. It grew on its own, watered by arrogance and neglect. One by one, his partners pulled out. Clients distanced themselves. That shiny little world he built with her began to rot from the inside. And her? She didn't stick around for the cleanup. She packed her bags and vanished the moment the headlines shifted. He was left standing in the smoke, alone, confused, undone. I, on the other hand, was quietly building. I used every lesson I'd learned, every budgeting meeting I sat through, every late-night business strategy he once explained while assuming I wasn't listening. I took it all and launched something of my own, a consulting firm. Small at first, but smart, targeted, efficient. I poured myself into it, not to prove anything to anyone else, but to myself. I wanted to see what I could build without being someone's shadow, and what began as a whisper of an idea turned into momentum. Real, tangible, exhilarating momentum. I wasn't seeking revenge anymore. That stage had passed. This was about becoming, reclaiming, choosing my voice, my time, my terms. Every client I signed, every invoice I sent, felt like a step further from who I used to be, and deeper into the woman I was always meant to become. The irony was delicious. The very skills I was once told were just supportive turned out to be my foundation. He'd replaced me like I was an appliance that stopped working, but I didn't just bounce back. I evolved. One night, after a long client call, I found myself scrolling through social media. Just habit, not with any intention. And that's when I saw it. His profile, empty bio, barely any likes, no photos with her anymore. The comments were brutal. Investors asking for statements. Old colleagues questioning his ethics. A slow unraveling, digitized and public. I didn't smile exactly, but I felt something settle. Not satisfaction in his fall, but peace in knowing I'd never have to prove my worth to that man again. He was now a cautionary tale. I was the one who got away, and rose. And then came the blog post. I never put my name on it. I didn't have to. It was called How to Burn the Man Who Replaced You, and I wrote it in one night, not out of bitterness, but from truth. Raw, real truth. I talked about betrayal, about silence as strategy, about building leverage in the shadows. I didn't name names, didn't need to. The story was too familiar to too many women. By the time I woke up the next morning, it had already started going viral. Shares, comments, thousands of women saying, "This is my story, this is my power." It became something bigger than I ever imagined. Podcasts invited me to speak. Women's groups asked for workshops. Strangers sent messages, not of pity, but of solidarity. I realized this wasn't just about my story anymore. It was about every woman who'd been erased, dismissed, replaced, and every woman who refused to stay quiet afterward. What started as a quiet plan for justice had turned into a movement. And I became the voice I once needed when I was sitting in that office, staring at that first message, heartbroken and humiliated. I never reached out to him, never responded to the few hollow texts he sent months later, the ones that tried to sound casual, like we could maybe talk. There was nothing left to talk about. I wasn't angry anymore. I was done. Free. He wanted silence. He got it. But not the kind he expected. Not the silence of a woman broken. The silence of a woman who had moved on, so far ahead, he wouldn't even recognize the life she built if he stumbled across it. Sometimes I wonder what he tells people now. Maybe he says I overreacted. Maybe he paints himself as the victim of a woman who got vindictive. That's fine. Let him. I don't need to correct the record. I lived it. And more importantly, I survived it. Not just intact, but transformed. That's the part people like him never understand. When you push a woman to the edge thinking she'll fall, you forget she might just take flight instead. I wasn't destroyed. I was redesigned. I walk into rooms now with a different kind of confidence. Not the loud kind, not the showy kind, the kind that comes from knowing I've already lost everything once and rebuilt something better in its place. I don't need applause. I don't need recognition. But I'll take the quiet nods from women who see me and recognize the fire in my eyes. The kind of fire you don't recover from, the kind you rise with. Every now and then, someone will mention my blog post in passing. They'll ask if I know the woman who wrote it. I just smile, because it's not about me anymore. It's about what it started. A conversation, a rebellion, a reckoning. I didn't plan to become that woman, but I'm grateful I did. Not just for the strength I found, but for the thousands of others who found theirs in the echo of my voice. He thought I was disposable, that I could be replaced without consequence. But in the end, he handed me something priceless: freedom, clarity, and the fire to rewrite my life on my own terms.